Welcome to Witchway's Folklore and Fairytales. I'm your host, Elise, and this is the tale of Black Annis. Black Annis lived in the Danehills. Her face was blue and her teeth were sharp, and she ate people. She only came out at night, and then you could hear her grinding her teeth when she was miles away. It gave people a chance to lock their doors. They didn't have too many windows in those parts because she used to stretch her skinny arms through and help herself to babies. They didn't have their fires in the middle of the room either. They put them in a corner, as far from the outside as they could get, to make it harder for her to reach. In one cottage in the Danehills there lived 3 young brothers, Jim, Jem, and Jonathan, and a sad little family they were. Their own mother had died, and their father married again, hoping to have someone to look after them. But that was a mistake. Their new stepmother didn't care tuppence for the children. She was cruel and idle and spent most of the day in bed. When she was up and about, she shouted at them all the time. They were made to do all the washing and the cleaning and the scrubbing, and she grudged every penny their father spent on them. The neighbours said it was a crying shame, but that didn't help the boys. Well, the year went by, and Christmas time came. There wasn't any Christmas tree in that house, nor presents either. It was bitter cold, and the children couldn't seem to get warm whatever they did. So they sat in the kitchen, huddled together, while Jim, the eldest, told them a story to cheer them up. All of a sudden, the stepmother heaved herself out of her warm bed. "Out," she said. "I'm getting up. Stir your lazy stumps and get some wood in." Jim got up without a word and went to the woodshed, but their father had been busy the day before and he'd forgotten to chop any. "There's none left," he said. "It's all used up." "Then go and find some," yelled the stepmother, "and fast." The brothers looked out of the door. It wasn't late, but the light was beginning to fail, and the cold grey winter dusk was closing in around the house. "But it'll be dark in a minute," said Jem. "Well," cried the stepmother harshly, "what of it? Black Annis comes out at night. She might get us. She's welcome, and good riddance, I say. Now be off with you and look sharp about it." There was no help for it. The boys bundled themselves into their coats and dragged out into the cold. It was a dark, cheerless sort of afternoon. Yellow lights shone warmly in every cottage window, but there wasn't a soul to be seen out of doors. Jonathan, the little one, began to cry. "Don't take on, Jonty. We'll take care of you," said Jem. "She'll get us," he sniffed. "You see." "Not she," said Jim bravely. "Not if we're quick." So they set to and started gathering firewood as fast as they could go. But there wasn't much about, and somehow they found themselves going further and further away from the houses. It wasn't quite dark yet, but the light was going fast. "Hurry," said Jim to Jem. "Can't," he gasped. "My fingers are frozen." They'd got right up to the little wood on top of the hill by now, and they were working slower and slower because of the dark and the cold. Their bundles kept slipping, and they had to stop to put them straight. "Oh, come on," said Jem at last. "That'll do. Let's be off before something happens." "It's all right," said Jim. "It's Christmas Eve, don't forget. She'll not be out tonight. If she hears the church bells, she's dead. No, she'll be holed up safe underground." "Maybe," said Jem. "But the sooner we're home, the better I'll like it. Let's run." But they couldn't because of the firewood, so they just hoisted it on their backs and plodded off home as fast as they could. A long way it was, too, and the sun was all but gone. Just a bright rim showed above the fields, and then, in the stillness, they heard the gnashing of teeth. "It's her!" cried Jonty. "She's coming! But she's supposed to have been safe underground, away from the bells." "Well, she must have forgotten," said Jim. He'd got his hand in his pocket and he was burrowing about among the bits of string and old nails. "I've got a old stone in here," he said, "and if I look through that, I can see what she's up to." It was a flint worn with water. He held it up to his eye. The others couldn't see a thing but darkened trees, but as soon as he looked through it, he saw her coming. She was very small and far off yet, but her long, sharp nose was twitching, and she sniffed her way along like a hound on the scent. And Jim knew what scent she followed. She was after them. "Run!" he shouted. "Run for your lives! Never mind the firewood!" He snatched up one of Jonty's hands, and Jem took the other, and they raced him off down the hill so fast his feet scarcely touched the ground. But it was full dark now, and the ground was glassy with frost. They couldn't keep up that breakneck pace. Like it or not, they had to slow down. Behind them they heard the grinding teeth again. "Look through the stone, Jim," gasped Jem. So he looked, and there she was, much nearer this time. Her great flat feet pounded over the ploughed fields, and her hair was flying wild. She was only a mile away. "Come on," said Jim, and seized Jonathan's hand again. They ran like rabbits, but she was still gaining. Then they heard a yell. "Who was that?" said Jonty. "It's stepmother," said Jim. "She must have come out to look for us, and Black Annis got her." "Good," said Jim. "That'll keep her busy." But they went on running for all that, because they knew she wouldn't stop for long. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they heard the slap, slap, slap of her feet. The stepmother was too bitter for her taste, so she hadn't stopped to make a meal of her. She wasn't more than half a mile off, and she was coming quickly. "Drop your coat, Jonty," called Jim, "and run for home." Jonty bolted, and when Black Annis reached the coat, she fell flat on her face and grazed her shins. She screeched and ran back to her cave to get a hank of cobweb to stop the bleeding, because if a witch bleeds, she dies. Jim and Jem went like the wind, but she was back again, and after them in no time at all, and they were tired out. When she was only a quarter of a mile off, they both dropped their coats. "And if that doesn't hold her," gasped Jim, "we're done for." Jem nodded, too spent to speak. Behind them they heard a scream of rage as she went sprawling. But now they put on a fresh spurt, because ahead of them they saw the cottage, and their father stood at the door holding his big axe. Black Annis was up and after them again. She was close at their heels. Jem felt her bony fingers clawing at his shoulder, and then his father hurled the axe full in the witch's face. She screeched, and at that very moment the church bells rang out, and she fell down dead. But as for the children, they went inside. Their father had built up the fire, and they drew the curtains and made toast for tea, and the church bells pealed all night because the witch was dead. This tale comes from Ghosts and Bogles by Dinah Starkey, and is a retelling of an oral tale taken down by Ruth Tongue in her Forgotten Folktales of English Counties. Black Annis is a well-known folklore figure, and was said to reside in a cave beneath a giant oak tree, which she decorated with the skins of her victims. Have you heard of Black Annis before? Let me know in the comments, as well as your favourite witchy story, and you may hear it here on Witchways, Folklore and Fairy Tales.